Have you ever wondered on how to change angles to their respective acute angles? So I just want to demonstrate using two examples on how to change angles to their respective acute angle. Remember, acute angles are those angles that are less than 90. So when you go to mathematical table, you are supposed to use the table for only acute angles. So in case you have an angle that is greater than 90, then you ought to change that angle into their respective acute angle. I want you to note this, that in most cases, when you want to change that particular angles into acute angle, then in most cases we apply what we call the unit circle. I believe you have actually met this unit circle somewhere. Most of the cases that are to convert angles to their respective acute angle, we use a unit circle as follows. Remember, a unit circle mostly help us to know the behavior of angles as they move from one quadrant to another. For example, we already know that angles in the first quadrant angles in the first quadrant, their respective ratios are positive. That means in the first quadrant, sine, cos, and tangents are positive. And in the second quadrant, only sine is positive. The third quadrant, only tangent is positive. And the last quadrant, the fourth one, is only cosine are positive. Remember, for the unit circle, the angles are measured anti-clockwise. We go to those quadrant goes anti-clockwise. So the first quadrant is here, the second quadrant here, then this is the third quadrant, and this is the fourth quadrant. Similarly, the acute angle in most cases is in the first quadrant. The acute angle is actually in the first quadrant. Now, the second quadrant, we usually take 180 minus that acute angle. Third quadrant is usually 180 plus the acute angle, and the last quadrant, the fourth one, is 360 minus the acute angle. So if you know that, then example is actually provided here where they're asking, write the following angles in terms of sine 55. You write these particular angles in terms of sine 55. Remember, 55 degrees is an acute angle. So we can actually apply this unit circle to try and work those particular angles in a simpler way. So the first question is sine 125 and sine 235. To do that, I'm moving on to the solution part. Now, to work out this, we consider the unit circle that you've talked about. I've already explained how this particular unit circle is worked on. Remember, theta is the acute angle. And for this case, the acute angle given is 55 degrees. Remember, 55 degrees is found in the first quadrant. So for sine 125 degrees is found on the second quadrant. So what we are going to do, we know the angles in the second quadrant are 180 minus theta. Therefore, I'm going to say 180 minus theta should give me 125. Then I'll try to make this theta the subject. So by doing so, I'll get that theta is equals to 180 minus 125. And if you minus that, you get that this is 55 degrees. And therefore, it simply means from there that sine 125 degrees is the same as sine 55 degrees. Remember, the two are the same because in the first quadrant and in the second quadrant, sine are positive in both quadrants. And therefore, we can write sine 125 equals to sine 55 degrees. So if you are to go to a mathematical table and you need to find maybe the angle, the sine of 125, you don't need to look at the sine of 125. Rather than, you are supposed to look for sine 55 because the sine of 55 is the same as the sine of 125 degrees. Similarly, for the second question, this angle 235 is found on the third quadrant. It's actually found in the third quadrant. How do you know that? But remember, for the first quadrant, angles are there from 0 to 90. There. For the second quadrant, angles are there from 92 to 180. All angles between 90 and 180, they're on the second quadrant. And then angles from 180 to 270, they are on the third quadrant. And angles from 270 to 360 are on the fourth quadrant. So if you look at angle 235 degrees, this particular angle is found on the third quadrant, and in the third quadrant, those angles, their respective acute can be found by use of this relationship. So I'll say 180 plus theta is equals to 235, implying that theta is equals to 180 minus 235 minus 180, which gives you 55 degrees. So remember, in the third quadrant, only tangent is positive, meaning the sine and the cosine are negative, and therefore sine 235 is going to be equal to negative sine 55. Remember, we are putting a negative here because the sine is negative in the third quadrant. And therefore, if you are to use a mathematical table, you will check for sine 55, which you get that one from your mathematical table, but you remember the answer you get to include negative, so that to show that that angle is found on the third quadrant. So that's how simple it is to convert any particular angle to their respective acute angle. But the bottom line is that, remember to include a particular negative if that particular ratio is negative in that particular quadrant. So it's important to know which quadrant the particular angle you want to convert lies. I believe that is an enjoyable lesson. Remember to subscribe so that you can be benefiting from more and more interesting mathematical lessons. I appreciate, and may God bless you.